Hello, welcome to another episode of Set Musings. We're up to Kaladesh. Interesting set. Some quite major changes in this set in terms of to do with, I suppose, mainly around the introduction of a new resource through the presence of energy counters. So themes and mechanics to look out for as we're going through the set is energy counters, vehicles, coloured artefacts are a thing. We've got keywords and abilities of crew and fabricate. You'll also notice how obviously the artwork thematically reflects the theme of the set. Any reprints that don't do that, you'll see the artwork's been altered accordingly. There's 264 cards in the set, 101 commons, 80 uncommons, 53 rares, 15 mythic rares, 15 basic lands. But if you notice there, if the observant of you may have noticed at the very top of the Scryfall search, it mentions a higher number in total for the set. So there's 264 cards in the boosters, but there's additional cards outside of the boosters, and that was due to the fact that there had been a change from intro packs to what we'll call Planeswalker decks. So we now have 2 Planeswalker decks. And the thing they did with the Planeswalker decks is they had exclusive cards in those which weren't available anywhere in the set, like in boosters. So there were 10 cards, 2 commons, 2 uncommons, 2 rares, 2 mythic rares, and 2 common dual lands. And we'll be also looking at the basic land artwork in a moment. So here are the 10 Planeswalker deck cards. Now you can see here there's this weird thing where it goes above the total count of the set number. The lead cards in the 2 Planeswalker decks were Planeswalkers, hence the name. And then you can probably see here those other cards. So of the 10, obviously 5 were in each deck. Additionally, there were 4 card variations as well in here. So just to take this back. So there's 54 cards in total in terms of the Kaladesh inventions. Now the inventions were, to all intents and purposes, a separate set. And we've seen this where they've printed a separate set of special cards, with alternate, this sort of inner border, whatever you want to call it. It's a different card style than the set. But they're, reprints, and these were inserted randomly in the boosters. But they're treated as their own set. They have their own set code. They have their own set symbol. And you can see they're numbered out of 54. So 54 of these. And many of you that are familiar with Magic will recognise these as fairly major reprints. Now, in addition to the fact that they were reprints of older sets, you may also notice, if you're already familiar with Kaladesh, there's 5 of these at least here that appear to be, sort of reprints of the set itself, even though they were released alongside it, but they're in the database as reprints. And of course, for each card, it goes back various lengths in Magic's history. And some have been reprinted more times than others. Now, my understanding is that these were all foils. You can see there's a rather interesting soul ring here as well, and the rings of bright earth. But this was something we were seeing more and more of in sets, where we had this sort of special other set where they were randomly cropping up in the boosters. So, speaking of reprints generally, back to the set itself, back to Kaladesh from the inventions. Oh, actually one other thing. So, the inventions in total for the whole block, there were 54. There were actually 30 of those in Kaladesh, and the remainder, and we'll talk about those in the next episode for the block, there were 24 Ether Revolt inventions, because we're currently in the 2-set block. So back to the set itself, 13 reprints, and you can probably see here quite clearly, because of the strong theme of the set and how that was reflected in the artwork, that these are new art. This is new artwork for older cards. $246 new cards, or new at the time. Obviously these have been, some of these would have been reprinted since then. So cards which are colourless in the casting cost. Now you'll notice we've got 51 cards where this is the case, but some of these do have an activation cost which is coloured. So their colour ID is not colourless, but their casting cost is. And as we scroll down, you can probably see those sort of stick out or up near the top here. And then we move on to the cards which not only are colourless in the casting cost but colourless elsewhere. But notice the presence of these energy counters, which we'll get onto in a moment, and also vehicles. And you can probably notice the keyword crew there as well, which we'll be talking about. So monocolour in the casting cost. We have 183 cards here. Now, as I scroll through some of these, you may also notice something else. Or not, as the case may be. But let's just scroll through them and see if anything bounces out at us. But what you notice is, a large amount of the set, even with the presence of so many artifacts, a large amount of the set is still monocoloured in respect to the casting cost. You can also see the presence of several planeswalkers, but again we have to be a little bit careful, because just the way the search works through the set, it's including these ones that are only available in the Planeswalker decks. So that's something else you need to keep an eye on when you're looking at this set in Scryfall. We'll come on to some of the tribes in a moment, but they're doing some interesting things tribally, which I'd completely forgotten about in here. So we've got 15 cards with 2 colours in the casting cost. Now moving on to creatures for the individual colours, so we can get a feel for the tribal, both in terms of the monocolour cards and then cards where that colour was also featured in multicolour cards. So it looks like already you can see dwarves look like a pretty major thing in white, and as we start to look at the different keywords and abilities, we'll find there does seem to be a connection between dwarves and the use of vehicles in some instances, particularly, where is it down here? And also notice the subtype of artificer as well. It's quite predominant in white. In blue, we have Vedelkin here, but there's a few other artificers. Like historically, there's always been an association between blue and artifacts in Magic's history. So it's interesting to see artifact manipulation, however you want to think about it, spread out in some ways across all the colours. So quite a number of Vedelkan creature cards there. Moving on to black, we have Etherborn, alongside some other black tribes that you may be more familiar with. Got a few rogues here as well as a subtype. And then it's red in the casting cost. If you look down, you'll see gremlins. There's a few gremlins in red. There we go. But we've got some pilots and some rogues as a subtype. But the other thing you might notice, and we'll get back to these, is we seem to have, certainly here, this Gear Hulk cropping up. So in green, got elves, but we've got artificers as well. Or artificers as a subtype, a creature subtype. Okay, big spells, 4 of them. So compared to other sets, we've been seeing a lot more big spells in other sets. This one, the biggest spell, is 11 mana of any colour to cast, and then it's a 10/10. So energy, this was the new resource in the set. Now you'll notice, if I scroll down here, it's white, blue, black, red and green. So in all the colours, energy is mentioned, including multicolour cards and also artifacts. So yeah, that tells you quite a bit. You notice also that there's a lot of common cards, so clearly they wanted this to appear in a lot of sets. So that would crop up a lot. So with energy, you'll notice there's a way on a lot of these cards of producing energy, but also expending it. But that's not the case in all of the cards. On some of them, some of the cards, they do simply give you energy. And then I don't know if on here there's cards that only just utilize energy or use it up. I'm trying to see. And some you can see there's quite a big imbalance, although the method of generating energy probably gets triggered quite a bit. So yeah, ways of generating energy tokens, and they were indicated by the use of energy tokens. We've got vehicles, and you can see with a vehicle, in order for it to become an artifact creature, you have to crew it, and the crew value that affects the number of creatures you have to tap to give you a total power equal to the crew value. And you can see there that's anything between 1 and 4. We also have these artifacts where there is actually a colour in the casting cost, but they're still an artifact, and there's 5 of those. They're the gear hulks. We have also 12 artifacts which can have any colour to cast, but they have an activation cost, a coloured activation cost. So then we have cards which have crew on it. So as I've mentioned, crew was a feature of the artifact vehicles, but there were also 4 cards here you can see at the top which mention crew in some way. So they have that keyword there, but they're not an artifact vehicle. Then we have fabricate. So here we've got this as an example. Fabricate 2. When this creature enters the battlefield, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, or create 2 1/1 colourless servo artifact creature tokens. And obviously the fabricate number is reflected on either how many counters you get or how many tokens, and you sort of decide which you're going to do. And those are in white, black, green, and then a couple of artifacts. And it's also interesting, in case you didn't notice, to see how these keywords and abilities are sort of reflected across the colours. So you can see crew is white, red, and red, white outside of the artifacts. And then we have this cycle of gear hulks. So they basically map directly to the fact that these are the 5 artifacts which have a colour in, a monocolour in the casting cost. Then we have a cycle of puzzle knots. Just before we do that, we'll go back here, see if there's anything particularly special about this cycle. So they're mythics. They have 2 of a certain colour in the casting cost, and a keyword ability, and an ETB, an into the battlefield ability. The puzzle knots, they are common. They're colourless artifacts with a cost of 2, and each of them has an ETB effect which can be repeated by spending 2 and then a particular, or 1 and a particular colour, depending on the knot, and then sacking it. We've got a cycle of thriving creatures. So 5 common creatures that enter the battlefield with 2 energy counters and may pay 2 energy counters to get a +1/+1 counter. So here it's very much like there's a symmetry in the production and the usage of energy counters. Cycle of activated artifact creatures, so 5 common artifact creatures that have an activated ability costing 1 coloured mana that gives them a colour aligned keyword. And then moving on to something we're seeing a lot now in sets, and these draft archetype indicators. So these always tend to be uncommon, and as with this set, a lot of time you see them, there's 10 of them. So there's 5 allied coloured ones and 5 enemy coloured ones, and the idea is they provide a 2-colour draft archetype to build around. Particularly useful if you need a reminder or you're not super familiar with the set, and they allow you to try out a certain theme. Maybe you'll see them in the first pack and there's nothing else to pick in there, and you want to go down a particular avenue. But of course, because they're uncommon, if you're drafting, you're going to see quite a few of these in the course of a draft. And no doubt often you'll find with these, sometimes they might mesh together quite well to draft a 3-colour deck as well. So I don't know if that's something I've ever spoken about before. So of course, if you're drafting 2-colour decks, you'll often see dual lands. Now the only thing here is these particular dual lands are enemy coloured fast lands, so, and they're rare, so they're actually a new set of enemy coloured tap lands that were introduced, and they finished the cycle started in Scars of Mirrodin. You can see here they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. So these are the completion of that set, that cycle, which was started in Scars of Mirrodin, which had the allied colour ones. These are the enemy coloured ones. But because they're rare, obviously the chances of seeing them in draft goes slightly down. But we may see what other ways there were of fixing mana to help you play 2 colours beyond just making sure you've got the correct balance of basic lands. So there were a couple of artifacts which had colour in the casting costs. So rare coloured artifacts. There are 5 artifacts that have an activated ability requiring a colour, 1 for each colour. Now there's 2 in Kaladesh and the remainder are in Ether Revolt. You've got a triplet here of modules: animation module, deconcoction, I think that is, deconcoction model, and fabrication module. And with these, I think it's this one, it starts off so fabrication, animation, deconcoction. You can see they all have triggered abilities that lead into the next, but they're not an infinite loop. And you can see there's energies, a thing here as well. So a pair, there's built to last and built to smash, and then live fast, die young. 17 mythic rares in the set. You can say spread out across multiple colours, multiple different types of card, including those vehicles. And you can see those coloured artifacts, those Gear Hulks are in there. Here's our lovely basic lands. 3 pieces of artwork per colour. Look at that wonderful artwork. certainly looking forward to the Christmas Land Ahoy special. So we have 10 non-basic lands. Now you'll notice in here, I think it's probably going to include in the search the common tap lands, but just remember these were only in the Planeswalker decks. You wouldn't have seen these in draft. So what beyond these rares, what have we got in terms of mana fixing maybe? So we actually have an energy land that does some shenanigans, can turn energy into mana of any colour. We've got a legendary land, and we have a sequestered stash. But beyond this one, I don't see, and that's an uncommon, I don't see any sort of low rarity ways of generating multiple colours. We've got 6 Planeswalkers, and again this includes the Planeswalkers in the Planeswalker decks. So one thing you'll notice is it always appears as though the Planeswalker deck Planeswalkers are slightly watered down versions of a Planeswalker. And then we've got a couple of 2-coloured Planeswalkers in the deck, in the set. Then 10 legendary creatures. No mono white legendary, but a number of 2-colour legendaries, and we've also got some artifacts, vehicles and land legendary as well. So 130 creatures in the set. There are 7 enchantments. There are 5 auras. Although only in 3 colours. You have 25 artifact creatures, and that's a lot. And part of that is just the fact that it's obviously an artifact heavy set, and also we've got that cycle of gear hulks as well. We have just 2 pieces of equipment, even though it's an artifact set. So obviously something else was taking up slots. Quite a high number of just regular artifacts as well. Also notice here's a bit of mana fixing. And then these. So we've got 11 vehicles. We're just sort of adding to that artifact count as well. Notice the quite unique inner border there. 33 instants. So depending on the colour, there are a lot of interesting things stapled together. You might look through white and think, yeah, a lot of this is fairly consistent with what you see, regularly in white at instant speed. Some of these also you get a card replacement effect where you get to draw a card as part of the spell. But I think it's not till we get through to, say, blue, we start to see the set themes being maybe stapled on, so we get a colourless counter, a counter spell for colourless cards or colourless spells. There's a bounce there. Some conditional countering. Yeah, here's some energy creeping in, stapled on. Here's a modal spell. Something here that counters non-artifact spells. But it is interesting, a lot of these look, apart from the artifact ones, look that they be at home in any set, which is curious. And, you know, obviously some really stick out, like the energy ones. But yeah. Yeah, it's quite surprising actually. Now I do know there's several in here which are, the sorcery stuff seems to be a bit more thematically related. If you look here. We've got energy as well creeping through. There's our nice green spell that gets rid of a lot of stuff, artifact, enchantments or land. This is something else. I think this is a period when we're seeing a lot more of these where, and this is a result of it being in the Planeswalker decks. You remember in those Planeswalker decks there were cards that searched out the actual Planeswalker in the deck. That became a thing while those Planeswalker decks were around. I should have really screened this out a little bit actually, because it is a little bit deceptive is the wrong word, but of course it is showing up a few cards in here which were only in the Planeswalker decks. So back to the total set, 264 cards, as I've said, 278 cards when you consider everything, including the Planeswalker cards from the Planeswalker deck and all the extra Planeswalker deck cards. Difficult to know how to say that, and also the variants, those 4 alternate art, whatever you want to think about them. I don't think they were alternate art, but for some reason they were called, what was it, card variations. Right, price wise, looks like not an expensive set. Most expensive set, if you exclude the promos, $14 for these. This, 5 card cycle where they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. Vinter's Fair. Yep, and then we are Authority of the Councils. Already we're below the $10 mark. And then probably no surprise to see a number of good utility artifacts and the dual lands. But yeah, the price is dropping quite considerably as we go down. So let's look at it from the lens of EDH. We'll look first of all at the new cards. So most popular card on EDH Rec on their ranking, Inventor's Fair, Aetherflux Reservoir, Panharmonicon. Yeah, I remember that being popular at the time. People were pleased to see this, I think. Dramatic Reversal, Foundry Inspector, which was hang on, no, it wasn't a reprint. It's alright, I got it confused with another card. Okay, so that's our new cards. Our reprints, Diabolic Tutor. Okay, so interesting. Okay, Chief of the Foundry, that's the one I'm getting confused with. Prophetic Prism, and then Stone Quarry, which was a reprint from Shadows over Innistrad, so fairly recent. So, in terms of the reprints, Diabolic Tutor is top of the list, and in terms of the new cards, we've got Inventor's Fair. So when we mesh those together, what do we see? So Inventor's Fair is very high up, as is Aetherflux Reservoir. And then we get the Diabolic Tutor, Panharmonicon. Here's another new card. And then so on. Wow, so yeah, quite a few of the newer cards at the time are bubbling above the reprints, even to the point above Diabolic Tutor. And something extra I've added in here. So this is in order of their popularity on the EDH Rec ranking, against the EDH Rec ranking. We have Gonti, Campbell, Padim, Rashmi, Piar Nalar, and Avia Pashari. And then bring up the rear we have Dipala Pilot Exemplar. Two of these Planeswalker decks, which we've mentioned in passing already. Chandra Pyrogenesis and Nissa Nature's Artisan with the Planeswalker. So two decks containing two exclusive cards, the collector's numbers above 264. And there's our fixing for the decks. This is a list of the exclusive cards. And there was some additional rares in here. The rare count went up quite a bit in these decks, actually, compared to the intro packs. And there's the other deck as well. And as you probably saw there, they are both enemy coloured decks there. White, red and blue, green. Booster battle packs for a thing. Still at this point, it's like a sort of twist on Pack Wars, really. I'll include links to the set in MTG Wiki, so you can go through this at your leisure. And then we also had a Deck Builders Toolkit released as alongside the set as well. Again, they slightly altered the semi-random component, the fixed content, how they managed the semi-random component. You can see they were sort of picking from a card pool of different archetypes to make up that semi-random. You didn't get all the cards, you just got 4 out of the 11. Now in the fixed section, you'll notice, yeah, this is what I was talking about. So these tap lands were now forming part. At this point, it looks like the basic land count was still 100. I can't remember if I'm right on this. At some point, didn't they sort of drop and take it out of here? Because this was eating into your sort of card count effectively. And then just a look ahead for the Commander Durdle episode, which is going to be Dipla Pilot Exemplar. So I thought that'd be interesting to do a Dwarves vehicle build. So I'll talk a bit about that in the episode. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.